much for being here, and good luck with Nocturnal. We're here in Venice with director Tom Ford and actor Jake Gyllenhaal to talk about Tom's second film feature. It's called Nocturnal Animals, and is presented here at the Venice Film Festival this year in competition. Thank you for being here, guys. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
My first question would be to you, Tom. The film is based on the 1993 novel Tony and Susan, and by Austen Wright. What made you click with this particular project? What made you want to do it?
Well, first of all, when I read the book, I couldn't stop reading it, and I've learned that. Thank you. Jake's going to hold my microphone. I thought you were just going to hold it for me. It's very awkward. Anyway, I've learned, I think, that when you respond to something, even if you don't know exactly what you're going to do with it yet, option it. So I did that with this. The thing about the novel that spoke to me was that it was about finding, I think, the person in your life or the people that really mean something and holding on to them. And this character, Susan, does not do that. And in a sense, she pays a very high price.
So did you begin thinking about a new film right away after A Single Man, and you just couldn't be prepared to do that straight away, or
combination of things. When I made A Single Man, I was just in the fashion side of my life doing menswear. I added women's wear. I added about 100 stores, and I had a child who's now 4. And I was looking for the right project, and that's part of it. I didn't find anything that spoke to me. I had the option for this for almost 3 years. It was about to run out when I wrote the screenplay, because I'd been thinking, okay, it's a great book. How do I turn this into something cinematic? So that took a little while.
Well, one difference between the novel and the film is that you shifted the locus of the violent element from I think it was Maine.
It was Maine.
To Texas, which happens to be your birthplace, and then of course you grew up in the south of the United States. So why did you do that? Has it something to do with the way you did that? You look at the south of
Well, there were a couple of reasons that I did that. One is I believe you should write about what you know. And while I've been to Maine, I don't know Maine in the way that I know Texas and that I know Texans and the culture in Texas. Aside from that, in 1993, we didn't use cell phones the way that we do today, and if we were set somewhere where we had cell phone service, the story wouldn't be able to happen. You'd lock the doors to the car, and you'd dial for help, and that would be that. So I had to put it in a place that theoretically one could not have cell phone service.
The metaphor of it too is the metaphor of the space, the spatial, the spatial landscape of just barren, the barren where nothing grows or can really grow, where it's dry, is the landscape of a broken heart, is the landscape of the end of a connection, and so in a way Maine, which is more of a, you can't have winters there, but in that space.
You have Martha Stewart there.
Right, well, there you go. No, it's more lush, it has that, and the qualities that he shot the movie with, these sort of enormous landscapes and this barren open land that my character's walking through.
Which emphasizes the loneliness of the character. We see Jake's character wandering tiny in this vast desert, and then in the same way we see Susan in Los Angeles, tiny in a giant museum, and either I shot everyone either from a distance where they're very small, or up close, so that we feel very intimate and very personal.
You managed to combine a real landscape, which is a natural landscape, with the landscape of a city, and to connect them in the element of loneliness in a certain sense. I wanted to ask something to you, Jake. You actually play 2 roles, but in these 2 roles you play in the film, you run the gamut, basically, from of every possible sentiment or feeling that a human might have, because you appear, you're said to be weak, you're sentimental, you're romantic, you're gentle, and then you happen to be desperate, and you get to be totally even violent, because there's a reaction scene which is extremely strong. So how did you approach this type of role? Did you have to work into discrete mental spaces or something like that? Because it seemed difficult to achieve as a whole.
Well, it couldn't have come at a better time. I had played a number of characters that particularly that had a lot of control, that were violent, sort of farther away from their hearts in a way, and either in different stories had to be brought to it at the end or never had a heart really to begin with. And so Tom approached me with this, and it was a character that was just a sort of very sensitive, vulnerable heart, sort of walking around willing to connect.
As Jake really is, actually.
I am not ashamed to say that probably that is true. And so in that way, I think someone came up to me actually after a few of those films, and they said, I really would love to see what like you open and vulnerable in a space, and it as art does, it sort of mimics life in that way, and here comes a prophet of sorts to deliver you a message that you need to be told, and that was Tom. And so the journey was, how do you just open yourself up to the world when you have no protection and you have no, none of the things that we learn and close us off to the world and as we grow up, and that was what I had. So obviously you're desperate, you're vulnerable, you're abused, you're a lot of things, and it was not an easy journey, but a wonderful one. And I more than anything besides the result of the wonderful movie that he made, the experience to me was really loving and thoughtful, that he thought I should do it because it opened me up to myself. So that was wonderful. Seriously, though. Yeah.
No, it was.
He's actually pretty damn sensitive, too.
Yeah, very. Which I think often hides behind a sort of cynical
Yeah,
veneer.
cynical veneer, yeah.
Yeah.
About veneers, the film is also about what lies underneath the veneer of fame and wealth and whatever. So this might lend to be criticized. I don't know. I wouldn't do that, but maybe it might be criticized perhaps probably being a little bit indulgent, because what do you think about that?
We all have to speak to what we know, and having
Exactly.
been fortunate enough in life to have, I wasn't raised with a lot of money, but to be fortunate enough in life to have seen both sides and to be able to say, well, okay, what our culture is telling us isn't necessarily everything that it is.
Yes,
so I don't,
And
I see
ano-
it as
and ano-
fortunate that I'm able to tell that side of the story.
Another element, and I think this is going to be our last question, is that this is a film about, well, the story, I think, but the film is about the power of storytelling, because you have a female character that tries to learns or thinks that she's learning something about herself and a past relationship through a story that she's reading. So can you expound a little bit on this? Do you have something to say about this?
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the power of storytelling is sort of the ultimate power. We all create our own characters of how we would love to be perceived, how we think we are perceived, how we are actually perceived, and then who we actually are, and everything in between. But and stories, particularly stories in movies or in the theater, they're told in the dark for a reason. We watch them in the dark for a reason, because we're allowed to open up and be vulnerable to them. And I think Nocturnal Animals is a beautiful title for the movie, because it's this takes place a lot at night, this story, and she reads this book mostly in the evening and in the nighttime, and it's a time in which she gets to actually see herself when she's actually alone with herself, and it's almost like being in the theater for her in that way, and it changes her as a result. I think there's nothing more powerful than story. It's why I say I am a piece of the story that Tom has told. I am an interpreter of his words that he has said, and then he interprets what I've done and puts together the story. And ultimately, you're only as good as the person who is telling the story, and he is the storyteller here. And it is honestly a privilege to be in his mind and work with him, and then to be a part of his story.
Thank you, Jay.
Well, Tom and Jake, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And good luck
Thank
to
you.
Nocturnal Animals.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.